Hi everyone, Mrs. Hayward here, and I'm going to talk you through the plot of Saved. So, Saved is set in 1965 in South East London and is a gritty kitchen sink realistic play about disenfranchised youths and poverty-stricken Britain. So we start off in scene 1 and we're in Pam's home, Mary and Harry's home basically, and she is bringing this bloke she's just met that night back for sex. And they seem to have a lot of good banter. And at one point Harry walks in and Pam doesn't even bat an eyelid. Bearing in mind this is her dad walking in the 60s of her getting down and dirty with a boy that she's just met that night, and he doesn't even bat an eyelid. He just is like and walks out. He doesn't even say anything, whereas Len is a bit like, oh, what's going on there? But at the beginning of the play, it's like, oh, okay, these are two young people that look like they maybe have a nice future together. Then we cut to a lake for scene 2, and we see Pam and Len, and they are rowing. So they're like having a nice little date or something, and Len has moved in there as a lodger to Pam's house. And it seems like there's some sort of relationship, but it's very one-sided. So Pam is sort of being quite cold with him. She also says things about her own parents, that they don't really get on, they don't talk. We also learn in scene 2 that Pam had a older brother that died when he was 7 during the war. Yeah, older brother. And that sort of was the start of her parents' rocky relationship. This is the only time we actually see Pam open up and show anything that's not just surface level. So they seem to be getting on all right, but Len is sort of very, very clingy, sort of talking about getting married and stuff, and Pam's quite dismissive of the whole thing. And then they put the boat to shore, and who's the person working at the boat hiring place but Fred? And Len is suddenly being all alpha male-y. And Fred is sort of having lots of laughter and banter and being very flirty with Pam. So we're introduced to Fred. And then we're in scene 3. And that is where we first meet the gang. Really horrible bunch of people led by Pete. And Pete is in a smart suit because he has just been to court where he is on manslaughter charges because he killed someone with his van. And instead of being really remorseful about it, he's just laughing and joking about it. And he says, oh yeah, I said that the child just ran in front of me, but actually it seems like he might have actually killed it on purpose, this child. So it sort of foreshadows things to come. They also make loads of crude sexual jokes. And then Len turns up. So by this point, we kind of maybe assume that Len lived elsewhere. Maybe he moved away or something. Because then they start to talk to Len, and one of the blokes, I think it's Barry or Colin, one of them says, oh yeah, I used to know him, I lived with him, or I went to school with him or something. And so they call Len over, they start to have some banter. And then Mary, who bearing in mind is a 50-year-old woman, walks across with loads of shopping bags, and Len seems to make the lads think that he is sleeping with her. Ridiculous. And so he goes over to Mary and helps with the bags and stuff. Why is he doing that? We don't actually know. Insinuating that he's sleeping with her, we don't know. Maybe sort of try and get approval from the gang, but they're making loads of crude jokes about Mary as well. Really not appropriate. Okay, then we move on to scene 4, and at this point we are back in Mary's house, and we hear a baby crying. And the baby cries almost through the entirety of the scene, and it gets louder and louder. And it turns out that Pam has had a baby. We're not sure at this point whether it's Len's or not, and no one seems to care about it. So sort of that is the start of this really isn't a very nice situation. And yeah, it says at points about the baby starts crying louder, and Len is sort of still being quite desperate. But Pam just absolutely does not care. She's sort of ready for Len to move out. Fred turns up and takes her out for a date. Say a date, obviously it's more than a date because they've already got a child together. Not that we know that bit yet. But we do see that Pam is sort of really clingy towards Fred, sort of desperately trying to like suck up to him, basically. And then we go to scene 5, and we're in Len's bedroom, and at this point Pam is crying. She's really ill. She's basically heartbroken because Fred has dumped her, and Len is sort of trying to get her to interact with the baby, and she is just not having any of it at all. And so he's there sort of giving the baby some attention, some love, and she just doesn't want to know, and she doesn't even thank Len for it. So that's that scene. And then scene 6, now this is the really big scene. So we start off with Len and Fred, and they're fishing. Maybe they're back at the same lake that they were before. And they're sort of talking about Pam. They're talking about their status and sort of how they feel about life. And then the gang come on, and then, there's hilarious banter. And then Pam comes on with the baby. And actually, this is a moment where she sort of stands up to Fred, and she's like, look, well, first of all, she doesn't. She first of all is saying, look, come and, you can go out, you can go and sleep with women, and then just come home to me, please. Which is so embarrassing and degrading. Come on, love, get a life. And he's like, no, I'm not coming round. Just, like, go away. Fair. I mean, she reeks of desperation. But she does get quite cross, and she's like, well, she says, there's your bastard, look after it. And so she leaves the pram there with Fred and the gang. And Len, being Len, runs to chase after her. And now this is where the gang decide, for a laugh, to torture the baby. They find the whole thing hilarious. So it starts off with them poking it, prodding its hair. Notice the it as well. They take its nappy off, and they smother the nappy contents, which is probably full of poo, all over the baby's face and body. They then start punching it, stubbing cigarettes out on it, throwing stones at it. They try to get Fred involved. First of all, Fred doesn't want to, but eventually he does get involved, and he is the one that casts sort of the killer blow, as it were. And they all just find this hilarious. And then they all scarper, and then Pam comes on. We already know that she's drugged the baby up with aspirin or some sort of medication to make it really drowsy and sleepy, so she doesn't notice what has happened. Maybe the gang have sort of covered it up with a blanket afterwards. And Pam comes on, and actually we see a moment at the end of scene 6 where Pam actually talks to the baby in some sort of maternal way. So could this potentially be the start of a new relationship for her and the baby? No, because the baby is dead. And then we see scene 7, and we're in a jail cell, and Fred is there, and he's been arrested, and he's been accused of murder. And Pam comes along and is still trying to be all over him, like, he killed your baby, love, seriously, get a life. But she doesn't. All she does is she just wants to be with him more. And he threatens her. He's like, look, you haven't bought me any fags, don't come and see me again. He's just really emotionally manipulative. And then she eventually goes. Len comes in. He's like, oh, hi, I bought you some cigarettes. And then we find out that Len actually saw the murder happen. So he was like waiting behind a bush or something. So this does make us question, like, we thought Len was a good guy. It turns out no. But actually we had these conversations before, didn't we? Would we stand up for it if we saw, like, it's really complicated, isn't it? And so, yeah, that then happens, and I don't think it rattles Fred that much. Fred just says he's not going to say anything. And his excuse is he's going to tell the judge that why would he kill his own baby? He left the buggy there, came back, and there was like a gang of unruly people running away, and he didn't see who it was, and so in theory he'll get off scot-free. And then we have the interval at that moment there. So it's an interesting place to have an interval, because you'd think the interval would be after the death of the baby, but it's not. So there's no chance for the audience to kind of like have a breather, a sigh of relief. We then get into scene 8, and we are having, what are we having here? So we're back in the living room, Mary and Harry's living room. They are having lots of tension between them, and Pam is getting really stressed out because she thinks someone's stolen her Radio Times. We're in a small confined space, There's lots of tension between the characters, lots of bickering, lots of eye rolling. Scene 8 is a great example of kitchen sink realism. Pam just has this big monologue about how she hates Len, how she wants him out of her hair. And yet at the same time, she's still chasing after the guy that killed their baby. Like, she's just totally mental, isn't she? Let's be honest. Harry seems to actually stand up for Len a bit and is like, well, look, he pays the rent on time. I don't really see what the issue is. So maybe we see a little bit of a bromance between the two of them starting. And then we go into scene 9. We're back in the living room again. This is, again, a very sexually charged scene. So Len is cleaning his shoes. And Mary comes in. She's in a little slip, like a satiny slip. She's getting ready to go out. And she ladders her stocking, and Len says he'll sew it up for her. So he's there very close to her legs. She's got this short little, like, underwear on, basically. There's lots of sexual banter talking back and forth. Some of it is incredibly frank. Bearing in mind, this is like an early 20s-year-old man and a mid-50s-year-old woman. He does, like, fancy Mary. Maybe she looks a little bit like Pam, but she's a lot more caring, a lot more clued up, a lot nicer. And then the scene 9 ends. We know that he fancies her because we have the stage direction. Mary goes, Len takes a handkerchief from his pocket. He switches the light off and goes to the couch. Ew, too much information there. So we know exactly what's going on there. Scene 10, and we are in the cafe. So it won't be this scene because they had this in 2022 for their exam. But they're in a cafe and Fred has been released. Obviously his discussion to the judges paid off and he's been released. The gang come in. Pam is waiting there for him rather desperately. Fred comes in with one of his girlfriends and there's lots of tension that ensues. Pete, in fact, is quite threatening to Pam. He's like, stop going on at him, otherwise I'll come for you. So again, we've got Len just sort of following Pam around. He even says he's going to be late to his job. He might even lose his job just so he can protect her and look after her. Mate, stop being so desperate. Scene 11, we're back in the living room now. This is the scene where Harry actually explodes. So we have lots of tension in the stage directions between Harry and Mary with the teapot. And lots of issues coming out. And Harry actually then turns around and is like, I saw you with Len, you know, you're dirty. And she sort of insinuates that stuff happened. And then it all explodes. And we actually see Harry sort of go for it, really. And Mary then assaults him with the teapot. And it all just really escalates. So in a way, this is kind of the climax of the play. We're actually seeing the characters sort of saying what they're truly thinking. It looks like they're at breaking point. They really can't take any more. And then we're in scene 12, we're in Len's bedroom. This is just a two-hander between Harry and Len. And we're sort of, Len is starting to pack his stuff and Harry is saying, you know, you're going to go, where are you going to go? And we find out that Harry says he'll leave at some point in the future. But will he? Probably not. He says that, you know, he'll eventually leave, go somewhere else. He never does. So it just ends up being, you know, a vicious cycle. And we see their relationship start to develop as well. And so we see Len packing his stuff. Harry's saying, you know, he is having the conversation with Harry. Maybe he's looking at Harry thinking, that could be me in, you know, 30 odd years. And yet, you know, I'll definitely go. And we think, yes, come on. And then we go to scene 13, which is almost all stage directions. And it's all silent. And Len is there fixing the chair. And no one's talking to each other. So we've just reset again. And the cycle continues. Len hasn't left. But he is making the chair. Maybe he is determined to break the cycle. Maybe he's going to be the one to make things better. He hasn't just left the chair. He's not just sitting on the sofa. Maybe he hasn't given up yet. Which is a great indication of Len being an eternal optimist. So that is a very detailed plot synopsis of Saved.